Hello, YouTube friends. Welcome, everyone. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Kilometer 237. No one answers to channel 19. The roar of the engine rose above the desert silence of Interstate 50, somewhere between Nevada and Utah. A lonely strip of asphalt stretched like a black tongue across the dry mouth of the desert. The clock read 2:37 a.m., a cursed hour according to veteran truckers, when the sky seems to hold its breath and the world hangs in unnatural silence. Luis Barreto, a Colombian truck driver who had been based in Texas for more than a decade, held the steering wheel steady in his right hand as he sipped cold coffee from a dented thermos. He was 45 years old, with a weathered look and a voice that sounded like wet gravel. That night, he was hauling a load of industrial lumber from Sacramento to Albuquerque, a long but well-paying haul. Nothing he hadn't done before. The stretch he was on, between Ely and Delta, was known to be one of the loneliest routes in the United States. No gas stations for over 120 miles, no towns, no streetlights, just parched bushes, shadows that moved like ghosts as the headlights passed, and the eternity of the desert. Luis listened to the truck radio tuned to channel 19, the open frequency among truckers, but he had not heard a single voice for more than an hour, not even a breaker or a hiss of interference, as if that piece of highway had been forgotten by the rest of the world. He tried to break the silence. "Breaker, breaker, any big ears around here?" he said, in a low voice. Nothing, just the faint murmur of the wind sliding across the windshield. He lit a cigarette with trembling hands. It wasn't fear, he told himself. It was tiredness. He had been driving for 15 hours. Maybe he should take a detour, stop, sleep. But the pay was better if he delivered before noon, and Luis needed the money. His daughter, Luciana, was about to enter college. He couldn't afford to slow down. Then he saw it. A man walking on the side of the road, just at kilometer 237. Luis braked by instinct. It was not common to see anyone on that stretch of road, even less on foot. The figure wore a long, shabby, dark-colored coat. He walked slowly, his head down. He didn't raise his thumb, didn't ask for help. He just walked forward, as if he had all the time in the world. Luis slowed down and passed him slowly. He was not a drifter. He didn't look lost. He was just strange. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, the man was gone. Not in the ditch, not on the asphalt, nothing. It must have been a trunk, he said aloud to himself, although his voice did not sound very convinced. He pressed the accelerator and kept going. 15 more minutes passed. Sleep was beginning to push at his eyelids. Luis rubbed his eyes and looked at the GPS. He had 3 hours to the nearest rest point. That's when the radio crackled. "Here, listen. Do you copy?" A distorted, barely audible voice. Luis jumped in his seat and responded immediately. I copy you. Who is this?" A silence. Then something like laughter, but muffled, as if coming from far away. "Don't get out of the truck." Static swallowed the rest. "What the hell?" Luis tried to tune in again, to turn up the volume, but the radio now only emitted a dull hum, as if something in the air was blocking it. Then the engine started coughing. The dashboard lit up red. The temperature needle shot up. The lights flickered. Luis cursed, slapped the dashboard, But it was useless. The engine died with a long sigh, like the exhale of a wounded animal. He came to a complete stop in the middle of nowhere, with an 18-wheel truck and a valuable cargo, and no one to help him. He turned off the ignition. Total silence. Only the distant singing of a coyote. He got out with flashlight in hand and checked the engine. Nothing obvious. Not a leak, no burning smell. The truck had simply died, as if it had given up, and then something hit the back of the trailer. Luis stood still, a hollow metallic sound, as if someone or something was knocking on the door from the inside. He ran backwards. He shone the flashlight on the trailer. Nothing, but the blow was repeated. This time, harder. "Hey," he shouted. "I don't have time for antics." Silence. Luis climbed back into the truck, locked the door, and turned on the portable emergency radio. Again, Channel 19. "Luis," said the radio with a familiar female voice. His blood froze. "Luciana," he whispered, but his daughter was in Texas, asleep, surely. "Don't open the door, Dad," said the voice. What is this?" Luis fell back in his seat. "Don't open for anything in the world." And then the radio burst into high-pitched, screeching laughter, impossible to describe. At that instant, the truck's door handle moved. Luis looked at her in horror. Someone was trying to get in. The handle jerked hard, then blows 3, 4, 5, like punches against the door. Luis took his knife from the side compartment and took a deep breath. But then they stopped. A whisper. Something called her name from the other side of the door. It was not her daughter's voice, nor human. It was as if something had learned her name, as if it was repeating it with curiosity and hunger. The cold enveloped him. The flashlight began to flicker, and then in the distance, some lights came on. A truck was approaching. Luis jumped on the horn. He honked to again and again. He shouted. He moved the lights. The truck passed without stopping, as if I didn't see him, as if he didn't exist. And in the mirrors, as the other truck drove away, Luis saw reflected what was behind his trailer. A tall figure, too tall, with his face covered by a shadow that came from nowhere, and 2 eyes, red, open as if they had not blinked for centuries. Luis froze, and then the creature smiled. Luis Barreto did not know how long he remained motionless in front of the steering wheel, his eyes glued to the rear-view mirror, watching the figure that seemed to blur in the shadows of the desert. The smile of that thing, because he could no longer call it a person, was too wide, unnatural. It stretched as if its face had been ripped from ear to ear, and the eyes, they shone with a light that no headlights reflected. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Only the trailer, the dirty wheels, and the closed night, immense, swallowing all sound. Luis grabbed the radio again with trembling hands. "Breaker. Breaker. Does anyone copy? This is Tiger. I repeat, this is Tiger. Truck stopped at kilometer 237. I need urgent assistance. Static only. Not even interference. Not a whisper." Channel 19 was still as mute as the road. Luis thought about going out again, checking the trailer. Maybe someone had snuck into the cargo. Maybe a vagrant, a drug addict, a madman. But the image of the tall figure, his eyes and that smile, stopped him. He wasn't human. He couldn't be. He pulled out his cell phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual either. That area was known for its dead zones, places where the phone became an expensive paperweight. He cursed under his breath. He knew no one would come. No one would answer. He was alone. He put his hands back on the steering wheel. He wanted to start again. Nothing. The engine roared faintly, as if something had been drained out of it, as if the soul of the truck, if that was possible, had been sucked out. And at that moment, the dashboard lit up for no apparent reason. All lights, all the gauges. The gas needle went crazy. The GPS screen started flashing, but it didn't show the map. It showed a sentence, "You're not where you think you are." Luis knocked on the dashboard. The screen went off. Then, something slid out the passenger window. Something that was not heard, that was not seen. An odor. A rancid metallic stench like old blood and burnt flesh. And it was coming from the passenger seat, where until a second ago there was nothing. He turned his head slowly. The seat was empty, but on the upholstery there was now a marked hand, a dark imprint, as if something had rested there, wet, sticky, and a voice, very close, right next to his left ear. "Do you remember the one on the radio?" Luis lunged for the door, flung it open and fell to the ground, rolling on the hot gravel of the highway. He got up scraped, blood on his elbows, but alive. He ran toward the trailer without looking back and hid under the trailer. From there, breathing heavily, he saw something move inside the cabin. A silhouette, slim, tall, with arms too long. Something was now sitting where he had been seconds ago. And his truck, his companion for so many trips, started by itself. The engine came to life. The lights came on. The horn sounded once, then another. But it wasn't his horn. It was deeper, more guttural, like the bellowing of a mechanical animal. The truck began to move slowly, moving without a driver down the highway. Luis ran in desperation. He came out of hiding and shouted, "Hey, that's not possible. Get off my truck." But the truck did not stop. And as he walked away, the radio inside the cabin burst into laughter, multiple, mixed, like a chorus of children and old people laughing at the same time. Laughter that came from no human throat. Luis fell to his knees in the middle of the asphalt. The darkness became absolute after the disappearance of the headlights. The loneliness thickened. And then he heard another engine. Different, old, a familiar sound, but slower, more draggy. Like a 1970s diesel engine, with free exhaust and dying spark plugs. Out of nowhere, a truck appeared in the distance. A rusty mass, painted a faded red by the years. It approached without haste, as if it were floating instead of rolling. Luis signaled. He waved his arms. "Hey, I need help." The truck slowed down a few meters away. The windshield was covered by a thick film of dust and dirt. The driver was not visible. Luis approached slowly, hesitating. Something in the air oppressed him, a feeling sticky, like when you walk into a room where someone has cried too much. He put one foot up on the passenger side running board. He knocked on the door. "Hello? Can you help me? My truck is gone. I mean, they took it away. I don't know how to say it." Nothing. He struck again, and suddenly the window lowered by itself. An intense cold hit him in the face. And then he saw the driver. It was him, Luis, older, emaciated, with a long beard, sunken eyes, as if he hadn't slept in years. And worst of all, no pupils, just two white, opaque circles. "You handled it once, didn't you?" said the figure in his distorted voice. Luis stepped back. "What are you?" "I'm what comes when no one else answers," said the figure, and held out his hand. "If you go up, maybe you'll come back. Maybe you won't. But at least you won't die here." Luis shook his head, turned and ran into the darkness. He walked for hours. The highway seemed endless. No more vehicles were passing. There were no signs, no cicada noises, no animals, no wind, just absolute silence, which became heavier as the minutes passed. Then he saw a motel in the middle of nowhere, no cars in the parking lot, with a flashing sign, VICANCY. Luis entered, driven more by panic than logic. The interior was old. It smelled musty wallpaper. At the counter was a bald man, wearing black glasses, reading a yellowed newspaper. "Do you have rooms?" Luis asked. The man looked up. He smiled, but his mouth had no teeth. "Of course, Mr. Barreto, the same as always. How do you know my name?" The man did not answer. He handed him a rusty key with a hand-engraved number, 13. Luis went upstairs, opened the door, and turned on the light. In the room there was a bed, an old television, and a radio on, tuned to channel 19. A voice came out of her, familiar. "Luis, are you still there?" "Luciana?" She whispered, not understanding. "Dad, don't close your eyes. If you sleep here, you won't come back." Luis turned to the door. It was locked, and there was no handle on the inside. I was trapped. He ran to the window. He stuck his elbow in. Broken glass. He cut himself. He screamed. He jumped. He fell to the asphalt. The room was gone. I was at kilometer 237 again, alone. But something new was happening. The air vibrated, and from the horizon, hundreds of lights began to light up. Headlights, engines, radios, trucks, all stopped in the distance, motionless. A procession of empty trucks, as if they were rolling tombs, and they all lit up at the same time, one by one, driving slowly towards it. No drivers, no destination, just a chorus of radios that began to murmur in unison. "You are no longer where you thought you were. You're not where you thought you were." Luis ran, but there was nowhere to go. Only asphalt, and kilometers of a nightmare that was just beginning. Luis Barreto was running, but there was no end to the highway. The ground beneath his boots seemed to repeat itself, as if the asphalt was trapped in an eternal loop. The same potholes, the same remnants of burst tires, the same dead insects on the white line of the shoulder, and the sound of the trucks behind never ceased. There were dozens, no hundreds, all lit up, all moving slowly, all empty. Luis stopped, panting, his chest burning. He was on the verge of collapse. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He didn't know if he had been lost for hours or days on that impossible stretch of road. The sky was still the same, a black canvas with no moon, and the portable radio hanging from his belt was crackling again. "Luis, go back to the cabin," whispered a voice, faint, cracked. "You still can." He recognized her. It was his own, but it sounded old, like a deteriorated recording played on an old cassette, a version of himself that he no longer remembered being. He fell to his knees on the shoulder. He began to cry, not out of fear, out of exhaustion, because his mind was slowly unraveling, because he didn't know if he was still alive. Then, in the background, on the horizon line, he saw a silhouette walking, a tall figure, slim, arms hanging like ropes. She walked as if she didn't touch the ground. Luis wanted to shout, but his voice did not come out. The figure approached, slowly, steadily, and when it was about 20 meters away, it stopped. "Do you know how many have died here, Luis Barreto?" he asked in a hollow voice impossible to locate. "Do you know how many truck drivers crossed this point and were never found?" Luis was trembling. "What are you? I am not what matters," said the figure. "It's what you carry that matters, and you've been carrying more than you know." Luis looked at his back. There was nothing. No luggage, no cargo. You don't understand, said the figure. I'm not talking about the physical. I'm talking about what you carry in your memory. And then, without her being able to help it, a scene burst into her head. The night of the accident, the one I had always tried to forget. It was raining. Luis was driving on a secondary road on the outskirts of Chihuahua. He was running late. He was accelerating. The windshield was barely visible. On a sharp curve, something crossed the road. A glow. Two eyes. Crash. The body of a young man flew through the air and was trapped under the rear axle of the trailer. Luis climbed down. It was raining. The boy was still breathing, gasping, his spine broken. He was mumbling something. Tell Mom. Tell her I tried. Luis did not call 911. He had no papers in order. He was drunk. He dragged him into the bush and covered him with branches, and he left. He got back behind the wheel. He kept driving. He never spoke about it again. The figure in front of him nodded slowly. That was the day you entered kilometer 237. You didn't know it, but from then on, your route was different. I didn't do it on purpose. It was an accident, Luis shouted. Of course they do. Nobody does it on purpose. But when you kill along the way, you're marked. The figure dissolved into shadows, and the sky changed. The night disappeared like a torn curtain. Dawn filtered in. The road appeared clear. The sun hit his face. Luis woke up. He was inside his truck. It was all a dream. The radio was on, playing country music. He looked around. He was parked in a rest area. There were other truckers nearby. One was drinking coffee from a thermos. Another was cleaning the windshield of his trailer. Luis sighed. God, what a nightmare, he said to himself. He started the engine. It was running well. The GPS screen showed his exact position, kilometer 236. He smiled. He started up. He entered the highway. But after 5 minutes, the radio changed station by itself, and a childish voice whispered, "Now you're just going to keep driving like it's nothing." Luis paled. The road again stretched more than usual. The GPS started to blink. Kilometer 237, Kilometer 237, Kilometer 237, Kilometer 237, and then the same boy from the accident appeared again in the middle of the road, smiling. Luis stepped on the brakes. Too late. The blow was sharp, violent, but this time when he came down, there was no body, just a backpack and a letter, the same letter the boy had in his pocket that night. Luis opened it with trembling hands. It said, "Dad, if you read this, it's because you finally stopped." Luis screamed. He collapsed. He fell onto the road. The radio burst into static. The truck began to burn from the inside, with no visible fire, and everything disappeared. Years later, in trucker forums, there is talk of a cursed stretch on a Mexican secondary highway, where the radios fail, where the GPS goes crazy, and where some truckers claim to have seen a guy named Luis walking with a blank stare, asking if anyone copies him on Channel 19. No one knows who it really was, but everyone avoids, at all costs, stopping at kilometer 237, because once you cross, there's no turning back. Route 77 does not forgive. Blake Hargrove had seen some strange things in his 15 years behind the wheel, but nothing like what awaited him that night. It was 2:43 a.m. when the steady roar of his old Kenworth T800 seemed to be the only thing alive for miles around. Route 77, an old back road that crisscrossed part of Oklahoma, was famous among truckers for being a shortcut with no toll booths or checkpoints. It was also famous for something else, something many avoided saying out loud. There were those who called it the Devil's Tongue, and not because of the infernal layout of curves, but because of the stories that were woven about it. Disappearances, voices on the radio, lights that had no source, and trucks that never arrived. But Blake was not superstitious. Not after being divorced 3 times and still paying pensions. To him, gas was more real than any ghost, and time was money. So when his GPS suggested a detour on Route 77 to get to Houston sooner, he didn't think twice. "Come on, old lady," he murmured, patting the board. "Don't fail me now." He turned on the radio, only static. He searched for a local station. Nothing. He went back to his playlist, but Spotify had lost signal. Everything was normal up to that point. Normal for Route 77. It was about 15 minutes before he noticed that he had not seen a single oncoming vehicle. Not even a glimmer in the distance. Neither houses, nor posts, nor new signposts. Only the road and the dense forest that bordered it, like 2 arms closing over it. It was then that he heard the first noise. A tap, sharp, as if someone was knocking on the passenger door. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. "What the hell?" he said, craning his neck. But there was no one there. He activated the truck's internal light, but the seat next to him was as empty as ever. He turned his eyes to the front, but his stomach shrank. For a second, just 1 second, he swore he saw someone standing in the middle of the road, dressed in white, right in front of the truck. Instinctively, he stepped on the brake, and the wheels squealed like wounded animals. The truck stopped dead in its tracks. Blake jerked up, his heartbeat deafening him. He looked out the windshield. Nothing, not a shadow. He rolled down the window and looked out. "Hey, are you okay?" If it was a joke, it wasn't fucking funny. Only the chirping of crickets answered, if that was not another illusion of his already tired mind. He decided to continue. He started the engine again, but now the atmosphere inside the truck felt different. Denser, as if someone or something was breathing very close to him. He glanced sideways at the passenger seat. It was empty, but there was something that wasn't supposed to be there. A perfect black rose resting on the worn upholstery. He hadn't put it there. No one had gotten in the truck, had they? "I'm tired. I'm very tired," he muttered, and started up again. He advanced another 5 kilometers. The fog began to thicken. A strange phenomenon, because there was no fog in the forecast, nor was it cold. It was as if the road was sinking into a kind of climatic bubble that was alien to the outside world. The trees were leaning toward the track. Blake swore he saw them moving. Not because of the wind. No, it was something else. As if they had life. As if they were watching. As if they waited. Knock, knock, knock. The same tapping sounded again, but this time it wasn't coming from the co-pilot. It came from the roof. Blake hit the brakes again, and this time he was not alone. As I looked in the rearview mirror, a figure appeared walking behind the truck at a slow pace, as if floating. She was wearing the same white dress. The face was impossible to see, and in her hand she was holding something. It was hard to tell what it was, but it had a pointed, irregular shape, almost like a cross made of bones. No, this isn't happening," Blake whispered, not taking his eyes off her. The figure suddenly disappeared, as if absorbed in the mist. Blake rubbed his eyes. He blinked. Nothing. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Sweat ran down his back, cold as death. He drove on, his breath coming in short gasps and his heart galloping. Then he saw something new, a sign, one I had never seen on that road before. It was made of wood, old, cracked, and hung crookedly on a rotten post. It was barely readable, but the message was clear. Don't stop after mile 77. He looked at the odometer, kilometer 76.3. His blood ran cold. He sped up, ignoring anything else. He didn't look to the sides. He didn't think. He just wanted to cross the damned 77th kilometer. But upon arrival, the truck's engine shut down completely, without warning. The lights went out. The radio spat static for a second, and then a voice. A clear, feminine, soft voice. Welcome, Blake. You are no longer alone. And then everything went black. Absolute darkness. Total darkness. Not a glow, not a spark from the dashboard. Not even the faint light of the moon. Just the deepest, thickest blackness Blake Hargrove had ever known. It wasn't just blackness. It was a presence. As if the road itself had swallowed him. "Hello," he murmured, although he knew no one could hear him. The cab of the truck felt smaller now. The silence was a long scream, and the absence of the engine was like a heart without a beat. He looked around with his eyes wide open, but he couldn't even see his own hands. Everything was dead. Even the watch on his wrist had stopped telling time. "Come on, ya fucking machine, turn it on," he pleaded, turning the key over and over again. Nothing. Then, without warning, the radio turned itself on. First, a buzzing sound, as if someone was turning the dial looking for a frequency. Then, distorted voices, distant murmurs that did not seem to belong to any known station. They sounded ancient, like something out of a 19th century wax cylinder recording. Childish giggles, shuffling footsteps, a woman sobbing, and then a clear sentence, spoken in a male voice that was not quite human. Blake Hargrove, date of entry, May 13th, destination, burial. Blake froze. What the hell is this? The engine tried to start on its own. It coughed, groaned, and started. But when I looked out the windshield, I was no longer on Route 77, not as I knew it. The trees had disappeared. It was now surrounded by stone walls with symbols carved into them, like ancient runes. The road was still a straight line, but it seemed to be suspended in the middle of nowhere. The sky was a purple mass without stars, crossed by shadows that moved with no definite shape. And the truck, it moved by itself. Blake's hands were not on the steering wheel. He tried to take control, but his arms were unresponsive. They were stiff, as if something invisible was holding him down. The steering wheel turned by itself. The engine roared, though he didn't step on the accelerator. The radio spoke again. "Every driver has one last trip. Yours has begun. Don't struggle. Don't stop," Blake screamed. He struggled to move his arms. Finally, with a superhuman effort, he managed to grab the handbrake. He slammed it on. The truck jerked violently and stopped. At that instant, the radio screeched with a high-pitched sound, and the windshield began to fog up. From the inside, not by vapor, but by something denser. A kind of dark fog formed inside, and in it, a spectral hand was marked from the other side of the glass. A hand writing something with its finger, as if leaving a message. Blake watched with his heart in his throat. "We told you not to stop." The radio exploded in sparks. Smoke filled the cabin. Blake opened the door and jumped out, stumbling as he fell. The asphalt beneath his feet was not asphalt. It was a black surface that looked like old skin, veins throbbing with every step. He crawled away from the truck. When he turned his head to look at it, it was no longer his truck. It was a grotesque structure with deformed wheels. The lights were blinking eyes, and out of the exhaust pipe came something that sounded too much like a human groan. Blake fell backwards, panting. This can't be happening. It can't be real. Then a figure materialized in front of him. It was the woman in the white dress, but now I could see her clearly. His face was covered by a translucent veil, and where his eyes should have been, there were only black holes. In his hand, he still held that cross, made of bones. "Why are you following me?" Blake stammered. "What do you want?" She bowed her head. An impossible sound came out of her mouth, a mixture of crying, breaking glass, and prayers in a forgotten language. And then he spoke. "You took the route. You ignored the signs. You carry the wreckage. What remains?" Blake asked, his voice on the verge of collapse. She raised an arm and pointed toward the truck. Blake spun around. Despite its monstrous appearance, it was still his truck. The trailer hatch was now ajar, and from it, blood was pouring out. A lot of blood. The stench hit him like a slap in the face. Iron, rotting flesh, damp earth. He shakily advanced to the trailer, and with fingers he couldn't feel, opened it all the way. Inside were coffins, 7, all closed, except one, which was ajar. Inside there was a mirror, and in that mirror he saw his own face. But it was not him. It was his corpse, with his mouth sewn shut and his eyes gouged out. He jumped back in horror. The radio, broken, without electricity, again broadcast a last message in a voice that this time was human. That of his mother, who had been dead for 15 years. "Sonny, wake up. You shouldn't have slept in that curve. You left." Blake began to tremble. No, I didn't. But now it all made sense. The extreme fatigue, the fog, the figure in the middle of the road, the rose on the seat, all of it. It was not a curse. It was the hell of a soul that did not accept its death. It had crashed. He had died. And now he was driving a version of Route 77, designed just for those who didn't want to let go of the wheel. The landscape began to change again. The stones with runes faded away. The trees returned. The sky regained its starry blackness. The truck no longer looked like a monster, although it was now completely immobile. The lights were flashing, the tank red empty. And next to him, on the asphalt, Blake's figure lay with his head against the windshield. There was blood everywhere. His real body, his real face. I had seen it from the outside. "No, I can still go back," his soul whispered. But no one answered, just the rustling of the branches as they moved slowly in the wind. And one last sign loomed ahead, illuminated by headlights that were no longer on. "Route 77 is unforgiving. Don't forget your soul behind the wheel." Time had become useless. Blake no longer felt the passing of the minutes, nor thirst, nor hunger. Only a kind of internal echo, a constant vibration, as if his soul were hanging in limbo, rocking between two worlds. In his chest no longer beat a heart, but he felt twinges of memory, pieces of her life, old voices, laughter, cries, the heat of the engine, and then the thump, that damned blow. Now I understood. The truck had overturned on the cursed curve of Route 77. Maybe it was a distraction, a micro-sleep, or maybe the accumulated fatigue of weeks without rest. It didn't matter. What was certain was that his body lay trapped in the crushed cab. His skull cracked open like an old grenade, but his consciousness was still alive. Alive, but trapped. And he was not alone. The trees on both sides of the road swayed gently, though no wind was blowing. The leaves rustled, but not as part of nature, but as if each one had a voice. Human voices, trapped voices, and then he saw them, dozens, hundreds of shadows, all dressed similarly. Leather jackets, trucker caps, greasy overalls, dusty boots. They walked along the side of the road silently, without looking up. Some seemed to mumble, others just shuffled their feet. And they all wore the same thing, a metal badge hanging from their necks, like a miniature tombstone. Blake approached one of them. He was an older man, with a bushy white beard and hollow eyes. "What is this?" asked Blake in a broken voice. "Where are we?" The old man did not respond immediately. He just held up his badge. It had a name on it. Richard T. Calhoun, killed at mile marker 332.1984. And underneath an inscription, "I'm still on the road because I didn't accept the end." Blake stepped back. No, no, no. I'm not staying here. Then a different voice spoke. Deep, firm, with an authority impossible to ignore. "You're here, Blake Hargrove. It's too late to change your route." The figure rising in front of him was not a shadow. It was something else. He was dressed like a traffic inspector, with an impeccable uniform and a notepad in his hand. But his face was featureless, just smooth skin, like melted wax, with a couple of slits for eyes. The inspector flipped through his notebook. Fatal accident, curve of death. Time of accident, 3:17 a.m. Cause, fatigue and distraction. Load, coffins for municipal cemetery. Condition of driver, deceased. Condition of the soul, unhappy. Blake shook his head in despair. "Number not yet. I'm not ready yet. I have unfinished business. My sister, my house, my life." The inspector bowed slightly. His notebook closed with a thud. "Your sister will visit your grave tomorrow. She will weep. She will light a candle. But you will no longer be there." "What the hell are you? A guide, a collector, a spiritual toll. Call me what you will. I don't condemn you. You did when you clung to the steering wheel after impact." The ground began to shake. The shadows at the edge of the road stopped. They all turned toward Blake. One by one, they raised their metal badges. All had been truck drivers. All had died on the road. And everyone was still driving in eternity. "What do you want from me?" Blake shouted. The inspector pointed toward the truck. Although it was wrecked in real life, here it was, back on its feet, clean, waiting. The keys hung from the rearview mirror. "Your last load has not yet been delivered." "Where to?" "On the other side." "Which other side?" The inspector did not respond. Instead, the woman in the white dress reappeared, this time sitting in the passenger seat. Her face was still covered, but now her lips were moving. "You must let go of fear, Blake. You're not meat anymore. You are weight. A weight that must cross." "Cross what?" She smiled, and behind her the sky opened up. A huge vertical crack that divided the purple sky like a clean cut. On the other side, there was something he couldn't quite see, but it pulled at him, like a spiritual magnet, like an echo of his true destiny. Blake swallowed saliva, even though he had no throat. He climbed into the truck. He sat down. He gripped the steering wheel. He breathed, out of habit. The woman settled in beside him. The inspector disappeared. Shadows lined both sides of the road like spectators in a ghostly parade. And then the radio came on for the last time. But not with interference, not with strange voices. This time, it was a song, one that his father used to play when he took him on tours as a child. Roll on highway, roll on along, roll on daddy till you get back home. Blake smiled for the first time in years, and it started. The wheels squealed, the engine roared, the road opened up, and the crack in the sky widened. The truck moved forward at an impossible speed, crossing landscapes that didn't belong on Earth. Red skies, weeping mountains, floating gas stations. Voices in every language waved goodbye. And then, a bridge, black as coal, floating in the void. Crossing it was the end, or the beginning. As the wheels touched the first span of the bridge, the woman in the white dress faded into light, and a voice rang out, his own voice, but younger. "You made it, Blake. Welcome to the other side." Everything turned white. Silence. 3 weeks later, in the real world, a new truck driver is traveling Route 77. His name is Jeremy. He's 38 years old, and he's hauling his first load of caskets to the state cemetery. It's nighttime. He's tired, but something keeps him alert. A couple of wilted flowers on his seat, and a note, unsigned. "Don't fall asleep on the curve. Don't take the rose. Don't look in the mirror." Jeremy doesn't understand, but keeps the note, and he presses the accelerator. In the distance, in an abandoned station, an old radio flickers, and a voice is heard. Next load, next soul, next kilometer. The stretch nobody wants to drive. The first time Vicente Morales heard about Route 187 was at a service station in Kentucky, while sipping overheated coffee in a foam cup. He was a truck driver with more than 15 years on the wheels, weathered by dust, storms, and moonless nights. He had seen it all: brutal accidents, animals crossing at the wrong time, even drugged guys trying to hold up moving vehicles. But what he heard that early morning was different. It wasn't a story of crime or recklessness. It was something more grim. An old truck driver, whom everyone called Big Ron, told the story while lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. He had a blank stare and a hoarse voice. "That road is cursed," he said in a whisper. "It doesn't matter how long you've been in this business. If you go through there, it changes your life, if you make it out alive." Vincent laughed at that moment, as did many others. The atmosphere was heavy with smoke, sarcasm, and coffee. But something in Big Ron's eyes was not acting. It wasn't old trucker exaggeration. It was fear. Real fear. That night, as he started his red International ProStar with a load of automotive parts for Tennessee, something in his GPS went off. There was no signal, and for some reason he didn't understand. The screen showed an alternate route, a back road that wound through thick woods and small, unnamed towns. It was Route 187. Vicente hesitated. He was tired, and the detour would save him more than 2 hours. He gritted his teeth, ignored the memory of Big Ron's words, and turned the wheel toward the detour. The first few miles were normal: tall trees, worn asphalt, and a faint mist beginning to cover the windshield. It was 2:44 a.m., and the radio was just crackling with interference. He searched for a station, but only found a channel where a piano melody was playing, very soft and out of tune. He changed stations, but the same piano was playing on each one, louder, more discordant notes, as if someone was playing it with the wrong fingers. A shiver ran down his spine. "Bah, nonsense," he muttered. "Kilometer 23. The haze thickened. The right headlight on his truck began to flicker. It didn't worry him at first. He knew that headlight had been acting up for days, but then both bulbs began to go out, slowly, as if something was sucking them out from the inside. The road was still black, empty, with no light posts or signs. When his truck was completely dark for a few seconds, Vicente slammed on the brakes and slowed down. There was no way to drive without vision. He was thinking of stopping and checking the headlights when he saw it. A figure in the middle of the road. One man, standing still, with his back turned. He was wearing what appeared to be a trucker's uniform, but older, more worn. He had a cap tilted to one side and didn't move. Vicente honked the horn. Nothing. He knocked again, louder. The figure turned around, but it had no face, only a kind of black mask, like dried soot, that covered his whole head. Then he began to walk slowly toward the truck, but not from the front. It was walking along the side, as if it knew exactly where the driver's door was. Vicente, with his heart pounding in his chest, stepped on the accelerator, but the truck was not responding, as if it had been turned off. The figure was still approaching. He heard a knock at the window. He didn't know how, but something, or someone, had gotten there. I didn't want to look, but he did. A cadaverous face, with sunken eyes and a mouth stitched with rusty wires, watched him from the other side of the glass. He was breathing heavily, fogging the glass. Vincent shouted and turned the key. Once, twice, 3 times. The engine roared to life all at once. The lights came on. The figure disappeared. He accelerated to full throttle. He did not look back. The radio went static again. Kilometer 37. The air inside the truck was unbreathable. A smell of rotting meat invaded the cabin. Vincent thought that maybe some animal had died near the engine, but the stench was too human. That's when he saw the rearview mirrors. In each of them on both sides, there were figures sitting on the fuel tanks, like stowaways from hell. One of them was the same man with the stitched face. The other was a woman without eyes, smiling with a deformed grimace. They're not there, they're not there. Vincent repeated, looking straight ahead. But then he heard the clattering on the cabin roof. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was walking on his truck. He stepped on the brake, turned the steering wheel. The truck swerved, almost ran off the road. A tree suddenly came across the road. He made an emergency brake. Total silence. Just the distant hum of the engine. Vicente breathed heavily. Whispers of Laurel Hill. As soon as he touched it, a dull click echoed from within, and the door creaked open on its own, slow, as if breathing a sigh of relief after a century of waiting. Inside, the air was thick, stale, and smelled of wet earth and old meat. The flashlight flickered once, then again. Sam descended the 5 steps into a small chamber, the size of a monastic cell. On the walls, engraved by hand with a crude instrument, were Latin phrases, some worn, some crisp. Non loquantur, nec videant, nec meminarint. They shall not speak, they shall not see, they shall not remember. In the center of the room, on a granite pedestal, was a sealed glass box. Inside, a face covered by a black veil. The body was too well preserved to be more than a century old. The skin, grayish, looked like it was made of wax, but Sam knew in his marrow that it was human, real, breathing. He recoiled, horrified, but then the door slammed shut. The flashlight died. Only the faint glow coming from the glass box illuminated the place. In the dead silence, Sam heard a murmur. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside his head. Tell them not to forget me. The voice was feminine, soft, almost a whisper, but it was not hers. Sam screamed, pounded on the door until his knuckles bled. Finally, after what seemed like an hour of darkness, the door opened on its own. The cool evening air rushed in. Sam staggered out, not looking back, not closing the door. That night, dreams possessed him. He dreamed of a convent in flames, of nuns gouging out their eyes and sewing their mouths shut. He dreamed of a cross dripping blood upside down, of children crying ashes, and of the woman in the coffin, standing by his bedside, staring at him facelessly. He woke up screaming, but the worst thing was that in his mouth there was ash. For the next few days, Sam tried to convince himself that it had been a hallucination, but every time he slept, the woman came back, closer and closer. In the third dream, she spoke. "They buried me alive. They tore my name from me. You will give it back." Sam began to do more research. He went to the Historical Library of Philadelphia. In an 1834 codex, he found a paragraph that spoke of a Sister Herminia, a nun accused of witchcraft, whose conviction had been secretly handed down by the archdiocese itself. Locked up in life in the dark pantheon, it said, the last penitent of the sealed eyes. The attending historian, an elderly man named Mr. Kepler, advised him not to investigate further. "These things are not made for the modern mind," he told her. "There are spirits that only need a name to return, and you already know it." That night, Sam dreamed he was in the crypt again, but this time with dirt up to his knees as if sinking. The woman whispered in his ear, "Name me." Sam woke up with a scream, with dirt under her fingernails. And then she understood. She didn't want to rest. She wanted to go back, and I was using him. Chapter 2. Those who remember their name autumn grew crisper in Philadelphia. The streets lining Laurel Hill seemed to shrink under the lengthening shadows of the oak trees, and the wind blew with a voice more like a moan than a breeze. Sam Whitaker was barely asleep. When he closed his eyes, the woman in the coffin would visit him. She no longer watched him from afar. Now she spoke in his ear. She asked him, gently and menacingly, to complete the ritual. "My name is lost, but you have brought it back." Sam began to write compulsively in his notebook, without remembering doing so. He found torn sheets of paper on the floor with phrases in ancient Latin and names of nuns who had been dead for centuries. The most recurrent, Herminia de la Cruz. Sometimes she would wake up in front of the crypt door with mud on her shoes and her lips cracked from mumbling. Her sanity was beginning to crack. Desperately seeking help, he contacted a young librarian and local folklore researcher named Clara Elston, who had published articles on Pennsylvania's cursed places. He found her in a Kensington coffee shop, and when he showed her the name and story, Clara blanched. "Did you open the crypt? The one with the inverted cross?" Sam nodded. Clara looked at him with genuine dread. "No one is supposed to open it. It's sealed with salt and ecclesiastical symbols. No one should, unless something from inside wants to get out." Clara accompanied him to the Temple University archive, where they traced documents from convents that disappeared after mysterious fires in 1826. A disturbing pattern emerged. Each fire coincided with reports of profane ecstasies, as the bishops called them, nuns who spoke in tongues, levitated during Mass, or prophesied the end of the world. In one of the files, they found a text dated March 14th, 1827, a letter from Bishop Carswell to Pope Lacco XII. In it, he mentioned, Sister Herminia, whose body resists corruption after her manifest heresy, and whose tongue still moves when she is named. That sentence made them tremble. Clara proposed something risky. Return to the crypt together and seal it again. Sam was not convinced. Part of him was already attached to Herminia. Part of him wanted to see her again, to touch that black veil, to ask her why she had chosen him. But he agreed. That night, with salt, crucifixes, and ancient chants, they crossed the gate to the Forgotten section. The atmosphere was heavier than ever. Something invisible seemed to move through the trees, noiselessly. The door to the crypt was still open. Inside, the glass box was empty. "It can't be," Sam whispered. It was here. The air became icy. Clara held the crucifix tightly, and then they saw it. On the wall, carved with claws or some bone knife, a sentence: "The living forgot me, the dead still remember me." And on the floor, a figure, sitting, shrunken, the silhouette of a woman, covered with the same black veil, head cocked to one side, the skin of an ashen gray, but alive, breathing. Herminia. "Let's go now," Clara shouted, but Sam was paralyzed. The woman got up, slowly, with movements that did not seem human. She did not walk. She slid her feet, as if the earth did not touch her. She reached out a hand to Sam. Her voice came not from her mouth, but from the walls, from the floor, from inside their minds. "Now you know. You know how they condemned me, how they buried my body and my faith. And you are the final nail." The ground shook. Clara pulled Sam and dragged him out of the crypt as the air filled with a high-pitched screech, like 1,000 insects screaming at once. When they crossed the rusted grate, all was silent. The crypt door closed again on its own. Sam fainted. He woke up in his apartment 3 days later. Clara had taken him in her car. She had called 911, but she didn't tell anyone what happened. She only left him a note on his bedside table. "That woman is still walking. I'm leaving Philadelphia. I advise you to do the same. If you dream about her again, don't respond." But it was too late. That same night, Sam felt the mattress sink in beside him. A whisper, warm, slow, crept into his ear. "Thank you for remembering me. Now remember me always." And when he lit the lamp, he saw written on the wall, in ash, "Those who remember my name can never forget it." Herminia's face was in the mirror. She was smiling. Chapter 3. The Last Procession. A week after the last meeting with Herminia, Sam no longer recognized his own reflection. The image in the mirror showed dark circles under his eyes, his skin pearly with sweat, and eyes that were not his. They were blacker, emptier. Dreams had become indistinguishable from wakefulness. In them, there was always a song, not human. Voices sharp and deep at the same time, chanting in a language that did not exist, and among them, hers, Herminia. He no longer spoke. He was in charge. Sam wrote incessantly, on the walls, on his body, on his fingernails with needles, symbols that repeated in his dreams, a circle bitten by an inverted cross, an eye inside a tear, and the word "Rememberar" written in blood. The police came once. A neighbor complained about the screaming, but Sam had become adept at dissembling. He said he had stress disorder. They left him alone. No one else ever knocked on his door again. Clara Elston, who had fled to Allentown, began receiving letters with no return address, all written in Sam's recognizable handwriting. But they were not letters. They were confessions, fragments of visions. In one, Herminia was burning the bodies of priests. In another, she walked barefoot over coffins, desecrating them while eyeless nuns wept blood in her wake. He taught me that faith without pain is a lie, and I have learned to hurt, said one of the fragments. Clara, driven by a mixture of guilt and terror, returned to Philadelphia. She found him hunched over in his living room, surrounded by black candles, with the television on static and unblinking. "Sam, can you hear me?" He looked up. There were scabs at the corners of his lips, and his voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't drunk water for days. "She's not asleep," he whispered. "She's awake, Clara. Walking this way, with me. Behind you. Always behind you." Clara turned sharply, but saw nothing. However, she felt an inexplicable coldness run down the back of her neck, as if someone was blowing on her back. She insisted on taking him with her. Get out of town, go north, away from Laurel Hill. But Sam refused. He said the last procession had already begun, and he couldn't leave her. He was her faithful, his reminder. She wants to go back to the site of the fire. She wants to walk where they burned her, where she was called a saint and a witch at the same time. The place he was referring to was Saint Agatha's convent, or what was left of it, an hour to the west, covered by woods, forgotten even in official records. According to Sam, Herminia had been executed there, along with other nuns accused of practicing the sacrament of forgetting, an occult rite that allowed certain souls to live between memory and flesh. Against all logic, Clara agreed to go with him. They arrived at nightfall. The convent was reduced to ruins, but some walls still stood. There were broken stained glass windows and a crooked cross on a peeling altar. The air smelled of mold, smoke, and rotting flowers. Sam began to sing, an inverted psalm. Clara stepped back, but it was too late. The ruins began to vibrate, as if an undercurrent was running through them. Figures emerged from the ground, not solid, not human, dressed in habits of centuries past. They walked with bowed heads, women, nuns, dozens, and behind them all, Herminia. It did not float. It did not walk. She was dragged along the earth itself, like a dead queen escorted by ghosts. Her face was no longer covered. Her eyes were empty. Her skin was pale as wax, but she was smiling. "Sam," Clara shouted, "don't follow her," but he could no longer hear her. He took Herminia's hand, and together they entered the heart of the convent. What happened next, Clara could never explain. An explosion of darkness enveloped the building. The night swallowed everything. When she opened her eyes, she was alone, lying on the road, covered in dirt and her ears bleeding. The convent, it was gone. There was only bare ground. The police didn't believe him. Neither did the psychiatrists. She was admitted to a hospital for dissociative disorder. She spent 6 months there with no visitors, until a nurse one morning left an envelope under her pillow. It was unstamped. Inside was a photo. It was an old portrait, blackened. A procession of nuns. In front, one of them, Herminia. Next to her, a man with sunken eyes, dressed in black. Clara recognized that face. That was Sam. And behind, in the shadows, something else followed them, something faceless, something that Clara still, to this day, swears she sees every time she turns off the light. The note on the back of the photo read, "Those who remember never die. And you already remember her, Clara. She will come for you too." It had been more than 20 years since Mark Weston last set foot in the town of Blue Ridge, a forgotten spot in the thicket of the Pennsylvania Appalachians. Since his grandmother died, there was no family left in the old log cabin at the end of the dirt road. just beyond the woods that bordered the hill. The only reason he had returned was because his mother, before she died, left him a letter. In it, a clumsily written but urgently charged sentence read, "Don't let the well stay open. Seal the lid with salt and nails. Don't listen to her." Mark thought it was a delusion, a senile superstition. His mother had been on medication, and the cancer that consumed her had also robbed her of lucidity. But something in that letter brought him back. Something she couldn't name, a pang in her stomach, an echo that wouldn't quiet. So she took a week off from work, loaded her car with tools, flashlights, and a few basic supplies, and drove into the woods like someone crossing a border she didn't want to look twice at. Blue Ridge did not appear on Google Maps. The signal cut out several miles before he got there. The only thing guiding him was an old hand-drawn map from his mother, where she had noted in red ink a dot that read simply, "The Well." The cabin was still standing, though more worn than in his childhood memories. The roof was covered with dry leaves, and the wood eaten away by the damp creaked when stepped on. But the structure held up. He entered cautiously, expecting to find animals or perhaps vagrants, but the place was intact. The curtains still hung, though torn, and on the mantel rested sepia portraits, his mother, his grandmother, and a woman with a blurred face he didn't recognize. The first day was spent cleaning, the second exploring the surroundings, and it was on the third day that he decided to look for the well. The fog was dense that morning, as if the mountain wanted to swallow the forest. He walked about 500 meters south, following the directions on the map. Among the trees, covered with undergrowth, he found a circular stone structure, mossy and cracked, as if it had been there for centuries. It had no rope or bucket, only a rusted iron lid with carved symbols that looked like misshapen crosses and letters erased by time. A broken chain hung from the edge. He bent down. He put his ear close. Silence. But when he went to lift the lid to check the depth, he heard a faint tinkling sound, like bells, very soft, as if coming from the bottom. He pulled away abruptly. The air around him grew colder. Even though it was summer, he could see his breath in the air. He took a step back and noticed that the ground was wet